Greetings, sisters and brothers, comrades, friends, Patreons. Thank you so much for your support as always. Welcome to African History Club, episode number 34. I'm your host, Milton Alimadi. So it's very hot in New York City today. It's been hot outside and it's hot inside my apartment. So once in a while, as I'm speaking today, you will see me go like this and just get rid of, the sweat. Otherwise, it'll be pouring down my face and even covering and shutting my eyes. So I just wanted to give you a heads up about that. And today's discussion is going to be focused on foreign aid, as I indicated in the last podcast. But before I get into that, I also want to mention that my book is now available to be ordered via Amazon. You can also order it directly from the publisher as well. But most people are used to Amazon. And the title is Manufacturing Hate, How Africa Was Demonized in Western Media. And this is the flyer for the book from the publisher, Kendall Hunt Publishing Company. And the book is a critique of the demonization of Africa in Western media from the 18th century all the way to our contemporary era. And I first did the research when I was doing my master's in Columbia, at Columbia School of Journalism, the graduate school, many years ago. So I did it as my thesis paper, and then I developed it over the years into the book. Initially, I had self-published it as Hearts of Darkness, How White Writers Created the Racist Image of Africa. And yeah, it's re-edited, it's been expanded, and I now have a publisher, as I just mentioned, Kendall Hunt Publishing Company. And the book is available as of this month, June. Hearts of Darkness is not really in print anymore, even though if you go on Amazon, you'll see some people are hawking the edition from many years ago. In one case, I saw some ridiculous amount, like $900 or so, for a book that I had put out for $20. So this new book, Manufacturing Hate, the hard copy edition is $30 and the ebook is $15. So obviously I encourage you to order my book and to let people know about it as well. And I will read a little bit from the book in the next podcast. You probably would not have received your copies by then. I don't think they'll be able to ship it that quickly. Perhaps the ebook would likely be able to be sent immediately, but I'm not sure about the hard copy. But obviously you will eventually get it, and we can discuss it together in subsequent episodes of the podcast. So I'll probably do like a series beginning with the next podcast in terms of discussing the book and the subject matter, because it covers a wide time frame and it's very consistent and fits in quite well with African History Club, looking at the different aspects of African history and Africans' engagement initially with the industrial West, and now increasingly with China as well. And this is a Chinese shirt, of course, as I indicated also. And you can see by the pattern, even though it has a very Africanic pattern as well. And I tend to believe most things trace Africanic roots anyway. All right, so that is for the book. Now, in terms of foreign aid, first of all, the term is quite misleading and completely useless. You know, when you hear foreign aid, you think this must be positive. What can be objectionable to aid? Aid has a positive connotation, does it not? Well, in this case, we're not referring to relief assistance. For example, we're not referring to like when you have famine as a result of drought. We're not referring to calamities such as earthquakes and the disruption that they cause. We're not talking about the recent volcanic eruption in Congo, for example. We're not talking about the misery resulting from warfare, such as what we're seeing now in the Tigray region in Ethiopia. We're not talking about those kind of disasters and calamities. Those require and call for relief assistance, which is above board and legitimate, which is needed. And ironically, right now, for example, the people suffering the calamities arising from the war in Tigray are not getting any relief assistance because the federal government is blocking it in Ethiopia. So that's not the kind of assistance that we are talking about. We're talking about so-called foreign aid. And we need to find a much more meaningful word to describe it. It is not aid at all. It is meant to keep Africa located, as Walter Rodney likes saying, in a dependent and peripheral location relative to the world system, the global system, where Africa remains supplier of cheap labor, raw materials to the industrialized world, and consumers of manufactured products. Manufactured from the raw materials from Africa. And yet, they have to buy the manufacturers at grossly, exorbitantly higher prices relative to the raw materials that they sell. Supposedly because there's no value in the raw materials. It's only after the manufacturing process that value is supposedly added. It's mind-boggling and it's preposterous. It's only a system of domination and control, of course. And Africa individually remain weak and unable to change that system, to remove themselves out of that location. And now when you have so-called foreign aid, which is provided selectively to reward people that are yes sir type rulers and to punish those who try to remove their countries from that location in the global system. That is when you really start to understand the true meaning and nature of what is called foreign aid. It is not, it has nothing to do with aid at all. It is meant, and it has succeeded, in fact, in reversing the potential gains that could have come as a result of independence, when most Africans countries formally decolonized in the 1960s. So clearly, if on the one hand, Africa's development is dependent on African countries removing themselves from that peripheral and dependent location, if that is what is required for development, then it is quite clear that foreign aid cannot be compatible with Africa's development, because foreign aid is meant to maintain those relations of Dependency, the relations that ensure the continuation of unequal exchange between Africa and the industrialized world. The types of unequal exchange that pretty much has existed actually for the last more than 500 years, well today into our 21st century. So I want to read a little bit of what Kwame Nkrumah wrote in one of my favorite books that I speak about often, as you know, Neocolonialism, the Last Stage of Imperialism. This is what he writes in the introduction when he's referring to the so-called foreign aid. In the first place, the rulers of neo-colonial states derive their authority to govern not from the will of the people, but from the support which they obtain from their neo-colonialist masters. They have, therefore, little interest in developing education, strengthening the bargaining power of their workers employed by expatriate firms, or indeed of taking any step which would challenge the colonial pattern of commerce and industry, which it is the object of neo-colonialism to preserve. Aid, therefore, to a neo-colonial state is merely a revolving credit paid by the neo-colonial master, passing through the neo-colonial state and returning to the neo-colonial master in the form of increased profits. And this is the other consideration. In most cases, the so-called aid, if it was in financial resources, the requirement was that the recipient country buy specific quantities of manufactured products from the country that is providing the aid. So the recipient country could not say, okay, I now have some resources as a result of foreign aid. Now let me look at the most optimal items at the most optimal prices and the most optimal sources for me to buy and to import. No, you don't have that luxury or that flexibility. You import products from the country that provided you the quote-unquote foreign aid. That was clearly the requirement from British foreign aid to the British colonies and former colonies, and the same thing with France and all the other former colonial powers in Africa. I want to read another section from Nkrumah. In the end, the situation arises that the only type of aid which the neo-colonialist masters consider as safe is military aid. Once a neo-colonialist territory is brought to such a state of economic chaos and misery that revolt actually breaks out, then and only then is there no limit to the generosity of the neo-colonial overlord, provided, of course, that the funds supplied are utilized exclusively for military purposes. And many examples from Africa. There's no shortage of examples. Foreign aid there's no correlation, no positive correlation anyway, between foreign aid and good governance or with economic development. So the classic example was, for many years, Mobutu in what was Zaire, now Congo. He had changed the name of the country to Zaire rather, from Congo, after He was used as a tool by the CIA, by Belgian intelligence, by British intelligence to overthrow Patrice Lumumba in September 1960 and brutally murder him in January 1961. Mobutu wrecked Zaire's economy. Mobutu killed, locked up, or exiled his opponents. Mobutu stole $5 billion from the national treasury. Over the years, corrupt, incompetent economically, and brutal, yet rewarded with foreign aid and outright military intervention whenever there was an attempt by Congolese to uprise and overthrow him. The United States, using Moroccan troops and U.S. aircraft, U.S. logistical support, would always intervene to sustain Mobutu. And his regime was maintained for 37 years. That is the best example, the best proof that foreign aid has nothing to do with development in Africa. On the contrary, it has everything to do with destruction in Africa by maintaining a puppet such as the late Mobutu. There's the book by Dambisa Moyo, the Zambian economist, Dead Aid. And she's also talking about the destructiveness of so-called foreign aid. And she gives the account where an IMF director who was sent to look into how the economy was operating in then Zaire, now Congo, reported that a lot of money had been stolen and then none of it was going to be repaid. And what happened? That official was withdrawn from the Congo, and subsequently Mobutu got the highest amount of foreign aid that he had up to that time been given, $700 million. So there's no debate in terms of the role and the mission and the destructiveness of foreign aid in Africa. We have the contemporary example, of course, is General Yoweri Museveni, the dictator in Uganda, who once again is maintained by the United States, has been maintained for 35 years now, since Ronald Reagan was president. And similarly, he's been destructive. He's killed a lot more people than Mobutu, locked up opponents, political opponents, exiled them, killed them. But he's also been very destructive for the region. He invaded Rwanda in 1990 and exacerbated the ethnic tensions between Hutu and Tutsi, and ultimately culminating in the genocide of 1994. But that aspect is somehow always left out of the Western narrative, because the United States and Britain had actually supported the invasion of Rwanda when it was still under French influence. And the whole purpose was to displace French influence over Rwanda and replace it with English, United States and British influence, using Uganda and Uganda's soldiers under Museveni as the beachhead to intervene in that region, with the ultimate prize being the rich mineral resources of neighboring Congo, through Uganda and then through Rwanda. And perhaps they did not calculate that it would culminate in the genocide that took the lives of an estimated anywhere from 800,000 to 1 million citizens of Rwanda. And up to date, Uganda is still one of the highest recipients of foreign aid in Africa from the United States, ranging from $800 million to almost $1 billion every year. Let me give you another example, still focusing on Uganda. Why foreign aid is meant more for destruction rather than for the development of African countries. As I indicated earlier, in order to develop, African countries would have to remove themselves from a dependency relationship. So in January this year, January 14, General Museveni stole elections from a very popular candidate, who every indication suggests defeated Museveni overwhelmingly. And I've discussed him previously. His given name is Robert Kyagulanyi. He's a member of parliament. He's 39 years old. He goes by the name Bobby Wine as well. He's also a very popular musical performer, and that is his stage name, Bobby Wine. So Museveni rigged and stole the elections. It was so blatant that even the United States Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, put out a statement on April the 16th saying the elections were neither free nor fair, meaning in essence there were no elections. Yet, the United States is now considering a $900 million loan that the Museveni's regime has requested from the International Monetary Fund. And as you know, the United States is the largest shareholder of both the World Bank and the IMF. And there's every indication that this loan will probably be approved by the board of directors. I'm actually involved with other Ugandan comrades and friends of Uganda in organizing a petition to try to block this loan from being approved. And the petition will be ready in a few days, and I'll probably post the link on the podcast as well, as soon as the petition is drawn up. Let me give you one final example from Uganda to show the hypocrisy of the global system. After the military coup d'etat in Myanmar, Total, the French oil energy company, said it was limiting its expansion and further new exploration in Myanmar because of the human rights abuses being carried out by the military junta. So that's Total. Oh, Total cares about human rights, right? It's all propaganda. Because after Total made that statement, the CEO of Total, Patrick Pouyan, and I'm probably mispronouncing his name. It's French, so I'll spell it out. Pouyane, went to Uganda and signed a deal to build an oil pipeline from Uganda going through Tanzania. And is valued at, the estimated value is from $2.4 billion to $3.5 billion. An oil pipeline extending over 1,000 miles, depopulating the regions where the pipeline is going to pass, with all the attendant environmental destruction and damage. This is the reward to General Museveni by capital and the global system. But I'm happy to say that there's been a vigorous resistance by human rights activists as well as environmental activists, not only in Uganda, but from over the world. And the official pipeline is called the East African Oil Pipeline. East African oil, the East African crude oil pipeline. So EACOP. And there's a campaign with the hashtag Stop EACOP that I encourage people that are into activism and are interested to do some research, look into that hashtag. And there are quite a few petitions. And if you care to support any of them, feel free to sign and share those petitions. There's one, in fact, that I also created on change.org, also protesting the construction of this crude oil pipeline by Total. And I'll also post a link to that on this podcast. So this is some of the best examples to show that foreign aid really has nothing to do with the development of African countries. In fact, it is completely contradictory, and not by accident, of course, by design, to keep Africa dependent on the control of the Western institutions such as the World Bank and the IMF, which are both controlled by the United States. So in order for Africans and African countries to really start charting a course that leads toward economic development, the first thing they would need to do is to renounce foreign aid. But that is not an easy mission, and I'll tell you why. It's not easy when you have, in many African countries, leaders whose primary objective is not really the welfare of Africans. And what do I mean by this? I mean, it's no accident that you have a Mobutu maintained by the West to reinforce Western interest in an African country like the Congo. It's no accident that you have an African like General Museveni in Uganda, who is actually quite reactionary, extremely reactionary, has made extremely reactionary, hateful statements that conservatives, white conservatives in the United States love. So in the past, for example, when he was interviewed by, at that time called Atlantic Monthly magazine, he said, "I do not blame the white man for slavery. If you are stupid, you should be taken a slave." And of course, white conservatives like hearing that reactionary, really perverted type of statement. I do not blame the white man for colonizing Africa. He said that as well. You see? That's the kind of perverted mindset you have. And then when Donald Trump said African countries were a collection of S-hole countries, this was the only perverted-minded African who said, I love Donald Trump. And if it sounds too unbelievable, I encourage listeners to actually do the research, and you'll see all these articles come up, because Donald Trump says it like it is, speaks. It's just mind-bogglingly preposterous, but not shocking, because these are the kind of misrulers that capital prefers in Africa. And that's why I say it's challenging. It would entail first removing reactionary leaders such as General Museveni, and to then have new leaders with a Pan-African vision who are not reactionaries and who actually love Africans and will work in the interest of Africans. And one example, of course, was Thomas Sankara in Burkina Faso. Cutting off dependency was Sankara's number one goal. And that is why Thomas Sankara was killed. And Africa needs more leaders like Thomas Sankara. So I think I'll end on that note, this podcast. Thank you so much, sisters and brothers. I want to recommend this book before I go. Economic Crisis in Africa, African Perspectives on Development Problems and Potentials, edited by Adebayo Adedeji, Adedeji, and Timothy Shaw. Thank you. Stay well, stay strong, stay Pan-African. See you next time.